So this is kind of a summary of microevolution. So particularly if you think of a population as just being this group of individuals, it might be growing, might be shrinking, it might be staying the same, that's got some allele frequency associated with it, you can have an input of new alleles into that population by mutation or migration, and you can have the removal of alleles. It can either be a selective loss or a random loss. By selection and drift, as well as individuals simply leaving the population physically via migration. And in fact, a population could be at steady state where there's a balance between the alleles that are incoming and the alleles that are leaving, and thus the allele frequency can actually stay the same. And in populations that are large and well adapted to their environments, that's basically what you see. You see what is known as stabilizing selection going on. First of all, the population is so large that genetic drift isn't that important. But you have new mutations and alleles coming into the population at a steady rate, if nothing else, due to mutation. And those alleles will tend not to be beneficial because the population is already pretty good at doing what it does in its environment. So those new alleles will tend to leave the population due to natural selection as fast as they come in. You have a mutation selection balance that's basically a steady state that keeps the population more or less the same in terms of its allelic frequency. On the other hand, if you put a population into a new environment, you'll have selection potentially for alleles that weren't as useful in the older environment. And this is another way of saying that populations that have a high amount of genetic variation are able to adapt to new environments much more readily. Because if you had a population that had no genetic variation, you put them in a new environment, whatever alleles are present would have to, that are fixed in that population, will have to be either as good in the new environment as they were in the old environment, thus keeping the population size the same, or they're going to be worse in that new environment, in which case the population will decline. It might be that they're better in the new environment, but that's unlikely because when you take something that's good at doing thing A, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be good at doing thing B as well. A pickup truck might be just fine for hauling around lumber, but if you want to put it on a track and race it as a sports car, it's not going to work as well. Things that are good at doing one thing are not necessarily good at doing another thing. But if you have lots of genetic variation going on within a population, if you have 3 different kinds of cars, a pickup truck, a motorcycle, and a sports car, and you end up in a new environment and you get to choose one of those as your primary vehicle. So let's say you're an international race car driver that suddenly is living in the zombie apocalypse, and a pickup truck is much more, useful to have. If you didn't have that pickup truck, you'd be stuck with your sports car and you wouldn't be able to really get around very effectively. But if you had multiple types of cars, if you had multiple variation within the population, then you could adapt to this new zombie apocalypse environment and drive around your pickup truck now predominantly because you happen to have it. And if you don't have that variation, the environment changes and you don't have as great a potential to change with the environment.